Okay, so yesterday we did a first sample for MvvmCross, and today I'd just like to do a similar type thing, but this time for TipCalc, which is the article that's on the Code project. And so today we'll just try and repeat the same steps again, just binding a few different controls as well, and showing again, that same type of behavior, just to get us booted on day one, or day two if you like, of N+1 days of MvvmCross. So again, exactly as yesterday, what we'll do is we'll start with Visual Studio, and we'll start with creating a new project. And that project, we're going to start with the Windows, and we're going to start with the class library, portable class library, sorry. You can see again, it's portable class library. And what we'll do is we'll start in a folder, just to make sure we're there, called N+1. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this TipCalc.core, and it's actually going to go into a folder, because this is N0, we're going to call it N01 TipCalc. And so this is where the code will be also on GitHub. So we'll create this project. It'll ask us what types, and just as yesterday, the types we're going to choose are .NET 4.5, Silverlight 4 and higher, Mango for Windows Phone, Windows 8 apps, Mono for Android, and Mono Touch, also known as the Xamarin Twins. So we hit OK, it goes off and creates that for us. And what we get is this kind of empty, if you like, starting point for tipcalc.core. And we're going to get rid of the empty class it generates. Then we go to NuGet, and in NuGet, so this is 2.5 of NuGet, so don't try doing it using 2.3 because you won't be able to get MvvmCross packages working in that. So we find in NuGet the starter pack, we hit install, and it goes off and downloads it. So that gives us a to-do folder. I know what we're going to do, so I'm going to delete them. And it also gives us some new references, a view model, and an app. Now, what we're going to do today is slightly different to yesterday. So we are still going to change these namespaces to correct them. But we're also going to start looking at this IoC, so inversion of control code, that was here in this class. So yesterday I really just rushed over it and said there's a block here that sets up IoC, because it wasn't really doing anything for us. But today we're going to use it. So let me just finish off correcting these namespaces. That's done. But what I'd like to do today is just to create a folder, and in that folder I'm going to create a class. So let's call it services, and let's decide how we're going to calculate our tip. So we're going to create a class, and it's going to be called, let's start with an interface. And this is going to be an I calculation service. And there's no reason it has to end in service, it's just very convenient to do so, to give it that kind of feeling. Good description there, sorry about that. So we're going to have an I calculation service, and what the calculation service is going to do is it's going to calculate how big a tip we should leave. So what we're going to return is a double, and it's going to be a double, well, let's return an int, and what we're going to do is we're going to pass in an int, which is total. Apologies for this, let me just move back. We're going to do doubles, let's do doubles today. So we're going to pass in two numbers. The first is going to be the subtotal, and the second is going to be a generosity. Yeah, there are various ways you could do it, and this is just what I'm doing now. So that's going to be our interface. We're just going to have a calculation service. We're going to pass in the subtotal for our bill, and then a number which indicates our generosity, and from that we can then calculate our, zoom that for you, from that we'll calculate how much tip to leave. So we've got our interface, so now let's implement an actual class based on it. So let's add a calculation service. Normally I wouldn't do it using this, normally I'd let resharper sort out classes and things for me. Just for demo, I'll do it this way. So we do public class calculation service, and we implement the interface. Let's implement it. And then what we'd like to do in here is actually return the tip. So let's return based on generosity being a number between 0 and 100. So that's going to kind of give us our percentage, as it were. So what we'll do is we'll do subtotal multiplied by generosity divided by 100.0. And that's our calculation. Now obviously normally you would have a much more complicated calculation than that, but for now that'll do us. So the important word here is service, or the fact that we end the class name with service. And what that means is the code that we highlighted in app, what it's going to do is it's going to find all the creatable types. That's types for the public constructor and a constructor that can be created, so not abstract or whatever. If their names end with service, which obviously our calculation service does, then we're going to find the interfaces that class implements, and we're going to make it a singleton based on those interfaces. Okay, so that's all that we're doing here. And what we then do is we take hold of the view model, and what we'd like to do is we'd like this view model, our first view model, to actually have an iCalculation service. So we add one, private read-only iCalculation service, and that's going to be our calculation. Oops, it's going to be our calculation service. And then what we'd like to do is have that in a constructor. So all we do is we declare this constructor, which is called constructor injection or constructor dependency injection, and the class itself will work it out for us. So with that done, let's actually implement some properties. And so what we do is we add a couple of properties. So the first one is double, and it's so let's just go for this as subtotal. And then our second property is going to be generosity. So let's do that. Again, it's double. Generosity. So you can see we have these two fields. And what we'd like to do is whenever either of those changes, we'd like to recalculate our tip. So what I'll do is here, in the set method, I will do a recalc. Cool. And again here, I will do a recalc. Cool. And then what we'll do is we'll have obviously the implementation of recalc. Void recalc. And let's also have this property that's actually going to be the amount of tip to leave. So public double tip. And this is going to again be, just use my helper for it, PMVX, so it's going to be double tip. And let's also have a total, just for fun. Sorry, let me not use cut and paste, let me get used to using these snippets. So double underscore total. So those are our two fields. And when we get to recalc, what we'd like to do is we'd like to have tip equal. So we use the calculation service that's been passed to us. And what we will do is we will call this tip method. And we'll pass in subtotal and generosity. And then total is going to equal subtotal plus tip. And that should be our entire view model. So just to recap again what we've done. What we've done is we've created a basic project. We added MvvmCross to it using NuGet. In the app and the view model, we just corrected the namespaces. We then took advantage of this bit of code here for IoC to set up our service. And we created a calculation service that inherited or implemented an iCalculation service. And then in the first view model, what we did, sorry, I lost my mouse. In the first view model, what we did was we declared a constructor that took an iCalculation service, and we let MvvmCross and its IoC sort that out for us. and then we just implemented some properties that are going to call through to recalc. So let's also, just for interest, let's put some default values in. So generosity is going to be, we said this was going from 0 to 100, so let's call it 20. Subtotal, let's put it in as 100 to start with, and then let's call recalc just to set everything going in the right way. So that's it. Hopefully we can build this. Let's see, build. Okay, so that succeeded. So now let's add a UI to it, and let's start with Windows Phone today. So let's go here and find Windows Phone, and we'll create a Windows Phone app. And this one is going to be called TipCalc.phone. And we're going to target 7.5 again. Oops, sorry, I keep losing my mouse. We're going to target 7.5 or 7.1 again, Mango. And that's just so I can run it in my preferred emulator when I'm running also with Android. So we've got this, and what we need to do is we need to add a reference to the core project, to the PCL. Keep losing my mouse, apologies. And once we've done that, we then need to add a reference to the MvvmCross again, to the starter pack for HotTuna. So we install it. And with that done, we then need to go through the steps that are in to do. And the main steps that are in there are obviously sorting out our namespaces, but also, so let's just do that. This is called TipCalc.phone. But let's also sort out, there's another one there. Apologies for the mouse jumping everywhere, something's going on my computer in the background. And then let's also sort out app.xaml, so we need to add the setup to the end of the constructor. Let's just do that. And then we also need, from the to-do, we need to add this block to application launching, just so that when it launches, we have the MvvmCross navigation that will occur. Right, so that's the basics done. Let's add a view. So we add a folder called views. In there, we're going to add a basic portrait page. So let's add a portrait page, and this is going to be called, because we're using naming conventions, that the first view will correspond to the first view model. So we're going to add a first view. And then again, following the steps from yesterday, what we want to do is remove this phone application page, that's its current inheritance, and instead of that we want to use MVX phone page. And we need to do that in both the C# and in the XAML. So let's take this and add it as that. So that's now got a valid page for both the XAML and the C#. Both are inheriting from MVX phone page. What we'd like to do is we would like to put in some controls for our code. So what I'm going to do is add a stack panel for our tip calculation. Can add a stack panel. Apologies if this is a bit small, but this is the space I'm working in here. So let me see if I can maximize it a bit for you. So we add our stack panel, and in the stack panel we would like to have, we're going to start with a text box, and this is going to be bound from text to the subtotal. Yeah, so this is where you can enter your subtotal if you want to. Underneath that, we are going to add a slider, which will allow you to enter the value. And the slider has slider's value is all bound in its value. So what we're going to do is bind that to generosity. And because we're working in Windows, the thing I have to keep remembering is that you have to put mode equals two-way. So we do that for both the slider and the subtotal. And then when we've done that, what we can do is actually have the output. So the output is going to be a text block. And first of all, we'll have the output, which is going to be the tip. And this doesn't need two-way binding, obviously. And then the second one is going to be the subtotal. So obviously you could add more to this if you want to. You could add, like, some Chrome that will tell you what's going on. So it would be easy enough just to put some text box in, And this first one is going to say subtotal. And the second one will say how generous. And then we'll have the actual calculations, which will say tip, service charge, and then subtotal. So those are the fields that we set up, and that binding should now work. So let's see whether or not this runs. So I'm just going to go to properties, and just to change the default emulator to the Mango one, I'll do that. And now this should run up. Let me see what happens. One thing I haven't done is I haven't changed the min and max on the progress, but I think I might be alright with the defaults. Okay, so I need to change the min and max. So you can see it's only going from 0 to 10. So let me do that again. Let's take a look. So what we've got here, let's check also. Okay, so I didn't bind the right thing here, so let me just go back. Too quick. So I bound the wrong field for total, is one thing, but also on the slider what I want to do is set the min and max. So with the slider, the minimum is 0, which is the default, and the maximum, let's set the maximum to 100. And now when I run it, we should actually have the right values appear, and this is going to be our tip calculator. So it's run, and you can see now that when I change this, hopefully you can see that our tip varies depending on where my slider is. So if you zoom in, it's hard to zoom in when you're using the emulator. Then you can see hopefully the tip has varied depending on where I am in that thing. Now obviously you might want to format those strings better, and we could take a look at that in a future one in terms of actually being able to provide a value converter that will display these things more nicely on the screen. You can see also that if I change this to a different value, so 105, then let me put it up to 2000, say. That will show you, and you can see that the tip and the subtotal also update. So that's our first tip calculator. There is some ugliness in there that we probably want to improve on, but you can see how that's up and running. So now let's take that same code and let's put it onto one of the Xamarin Twins. So what I'll start with is I'll start with Droid again. So let's go to New Project, and let's add Droid. So Android's here, and let's do TipCalc.droid, and we hit OK. And that will go off and generate a default Android application for us. So you can see it's got its normal activity 1, etc., which we will delete just as we did yesterday. And let's, in the resources, also delete main.xml that it generates. So that gives us a pretty empty project to start with. What we'll do is we'll add a reference to our PCL core. Done. And then what we'll do is we'll go to NuGet, and again we will add a reference to MvvmCross to the HotTuna starter pack. Right. So what we have now is we've got a similar type of thing with the do package. We've got a similar type of thing with some namespaces that need sorting out. We'll just sort those out very quickly. TipCalc. Again, in the splash screen, we'll sort it out very quickly. And in the generated first view, we again have this very quickly. One other thing I'm going to do is just on the splash screen, I'm going to replace your app name with TipCalc, just so I can find it when it gets installed. And at this point, hopefully, this should be able to be at least built to the first stage. Okay, so it's complaining about an error, but that's probably just because we haven't sorted out our resource yet. So let's go to our resource, into our AXML. And there's this thing here, which is the your manifest name. So we need to sort that out. It's just like sorting out namespace, really. So what it is TipCalc.droid. And again, as I said yesterday, if you were doing a project you wanted to release on the Play marketplace, you'd have to use lowercase here, so you'd actually have to change the Android manifest to get this name to work. But for now, this is fine. So what I'd like to do is just to actually try sorting this out in the designer first. So what I'm going to do is go to to the Solution Explorer, and this time I'm going to choose to open first view using the Android Designer. So that opens up our design surface. Hopefully we should see, it's loading the layout. Hopefully we should see that to start with we've got our text view at the top. What I'd like to do is just drag in a few more text views, so let's see if we can do that. So just as with the iPhone one, underneath the text view we would quite like to have a text box or an edit text. So let's see if we can find edit text. So just text it's called here. So let's have a medium text view. Let's see what that does. Yeah, I'm not quite familiar with this. That's a text view. How do I get an edit text? Text field. So I just added in the wrong thing. So we drag in our text field, first one, and obviously medium text is going to go. So let me just get rid of that one. So our first thing was the fact that this was going to have a text, and into the text we will put, so this is going to be our subtotal, and then that will actually be our value of subtotal. So we'll sort out the binding for that in a moment. But what we'd like to do is we'd just like to drag a few more of these across. So underneath there we'll put a medium text again, and underneath that we will put our another edit. No, underneath that we'll actually put, instead of that we're going to put a progress bar. So let me just put a slider in, or what is called in Android a seek bar, that same sort of slider. So let's take a seek bar and put it down there. So that's our seek bar. And that's going to be our generosity. So let's change the text so that it reflects it. So you can see you don't have to use, hopefully, the XML editor, but hopefully you'll also see that, normally I actually just do, because you get very used to the XML very quickly, just like you do with XAML. Right, so we've got that, and then we'd like to go back into text, and so what we're going to have is another text underneath, and this text says tip, and we're going to have another text underneath that. Oops, into the server, and text underneath that is going to be the value, so we'll leave that as is. And then we've got a couple more to add. So underneath that goes the text which says, and this one says total. And then finally we're going to have the bound one, which is going to display the total. So let's pull it down, and this total is going to display. So let's just save that, and then into the source we'll go. And obviously we don't need these IDs it's generated, they're a bit ugly. But what we're just going to do is we're going to actually just go Android. So this is going to be our bound thing, so it's local : MVX bind. And so our first one is going to bind the text of this edit text. So this is our subtotal. So that's all we're doing, we're binding the text of the edit text to the subtotal on the view model. Then we've got our label for generosity. Then we've got our seek bar. Now the property on a seek bar that we're going to bind is called progress, because that's what it's called. And that's going to bind to our generosity on the view model. And we've got a label called tip. And what the next thing, this Android text medium text is going to bind to, so let's get rid of that, is again we're going to bind the text to the tip on the view model. And then finally we have another one called total, another label, and finally we have another text view, which is just a label that we'd like to bind, and what we'd like to bind the text of this text view to is to the total. So obviously there was a bit of editing to do there, and let me just make sure that saves. Save. And what we should now be able to do, I hope, is to run this up. So let's go to debug, start new instance, see if it builds, see if we made any mistakes. Right, so it's built, and now it's asking us where to deploy. If you don't want this to come up every time, there is a toolbox which is hidden by default, where you can just select what you want. but hopefully that's okay. So we're going to deploy, and we'll bring up our emulator. And let's see, so it's deploying, and it's going to load TipCalc. Let's find out what mistakes I made. So here we've got our UI, and I think you can see that it's bound exactly as we expect. We can certainly sort out the input scope so that this guy actually has, a valid input scope. But I hope you can see that, both fields are bound as we'd expect. There is some difference in behavior about the way that this is displaying, that this is bound to steps, so it's not doing any real numbers here. It's just any decimal places here. But I hope you can see it's the same UI, the same view model, the same calculation service, and it's just up and running. So that was Android. Let's quickly move on and see if we can do another platform. So obviously to do Windows Store should be quite straightforward, so let's just quickly do that. And I'm really going to rush through this one because it's very similar to the one we've already done for Windows Phone. So let's do that. So we're going to call it TipCalc.store, and we're going to go through the same sort of steps really quite quickly. So what we're going to do is add a reference to our core project. Done. We're then going to manage NuGet packages, and we're going to look for MvvmCross, and we're going to find the starter pack. I'm going to install the starter pack. Once that's installed, we'll go back here and we'll know that we've got a main page that we don't want anymore, so I'll delete it. And then we know from in here we've got some steps that we want to change inside the app.xaml. So we'll just take this little block that we really need in app.xaml and we'll put it into app.xaml. Somewhere here. Just taking the whole thing. So here's our little block that needs replacing. And then we know we've got a namespace to sort out, just as we have in other things. So this is TipCalc, and this here is TipCalc. So all we've done is exactly the same sort of steps. And then what we'd like to do is add a views folder. So we're going to add a folder called views. And in here we're going to add a first view, because that's what we're used to seeing. So we're going to add a new class, and this new class is a first view. And it's a basic page, so it's going to ask us about whether or not we want to add common files, and yes we do. And then we know that there's something we need to change in the common files, and that something is in layout aware page. And the first thing we need to change is that instead of inheriting from page, we need to inherit from a MVX page, so it's from an MvvmCross page. And so this is MVX store page, and Resharp will sort out where that namespace is for us. And then the next thing we need to find the block here where the default template overrides on navigated to and on navigated from. We're just going to remove that because we don't really want to use those things in their template. We've got our own process file for that management. So with that built, we should now be able to take a look at the XAML. Okay, so it's asking us to rebuild so we can see the design view. So let's rebuild. And now we get a design view for our page. And actually what I'm going to do this time is I'm actually going to just copy the Windows Phone XAML across. So I'm going to take that stack panel as is from Windows Phone, so you can see it there. And I'm going to take it across to Windows Store. And somewhere down here, I'm going to find the right place for the grid. And I'm just going to insert that, and I'm going to put it into the right space on the screen. So grid.row equals 1. And what I hope we can now see, apart from sizing issues, I hope you can see that we've got the XAML just copied across. So let me just put a margin on that so it's not quite up against the edge of the page. Put 50 in as a default number. And we could probably increase the size of these text blocks as well, so let's just do that. Font size is 50. Now obviously what you could do is you could unify this across both projects by using similar style names or something like that, and then you would be able to actually share the XAML without having to add these font size type things to it. So let me just add the text block fonts. So all I'm doing is changing font size, nothing else. And with that done, let me also just for fun, I think there's a step, isn't there? Okay, so I could also change the step size if I wanted to, but I'm not sure how to do that at the moment for the slider. So with that done, let's just see whether or not we can run the store up. And hopefully we should be able to. So we run it up, and straight away, apart from the fact that I obviously missed one of my font sizes, straight away you should see that we have a working view model and the subtotal and everything else just updates correctly. So that is the application copy from Windows Phone to Windows Store really fast. So close that and come back to Visual Studio. I missed one of these, so let me just put it in before I forget. But hopefully you can see that was really straightforward to go from Windows Phone to Windows Store really fast. Okay, so the last of our projects for now is to add a Xamarin.ios. So we're going to add one. So here's our iOS target. And again, I'm going to add iPhone. You can do it with iPad or you can do it with Universal, but just for speed here, I'm going to do it with iPhone. And this one's going to be called TipCalc.touch. And we're going to generate it. So it goes off and it generates a default project for us. And just as with the other project types, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a reference to the core. And just as with the other project types, I'm going to go to NuGet and I'm going to search for MvvmCross. And when it comes back, I'm going to install the HotTuna starter pack. And with that done, it's done exactly the same as it does with others. And there's a few things to do, like we have to go here and we have to correct the namespace that's been generated. So we correct it. And then and we can tabify on something like that. I'm not worried about that. And then what we need to do is we need to look in here, and we've found an app delegate that we're going to use. And so we use that to replace the existing one. And that just sets up a few things for us, but obviously again we have a namespace to change. So it just sets up the way we're going to present our views inside our view models, and it sets up the setup, and then it calls start. So this is the same as yesterday's tutorial. So I'm rushing through a bit. Go back and look at yesterday's if you want a slightly longer explanation. And then once we've done that, the next thing we need to do is to add views. So we're going to go to add a new folder. We're going to call it views. And in there we're going to add our first view. And our first view is a UI view controller. And our UI view controller is going to be called first view. Yeah. So we add a first view. Let's take a look. So it generates this universal view, and I don't really like the fact that universal view is red to start with, but we'll leave it as red today. It generates a constructor. It generates and did receive memory warning, which we can ignore. And then what we need to do is we need to change this UI view controller to an MVX view controller, and with that resharpen and work out the namespace for us. And then we need to add some UI controls. So this is a bit more fiddly. If we go across to the Mac, which I'll do it in a tutorial or an N+1 really soon, I'll show you how to do this using the designer on the Mac. But for now, let's just stick with doing this in code. So we know that we've got this page to sort out. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a first label, and this is going to be a new UI label. And the label is going to have a rectangle, so it's a bit fiddly. We have to lay these things out by hand, but let's not worry about it. Let's just get on with it. So this is going to be a 10 into the screen. It's going to be 0 from the top, and we're going to give it a width of 300. Bearing in mind it's 320 is the width of the iPhone, and we'll give it height of 40. So that's our label, and our label we're going to give to text so the first thing we're going to say is subtotal. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the label. So we're going to add label to page. And that's it. So we're going to do that, and what we need to do is do that a couple of times. So let's do it. So the next thing we want to add is the field, the text field for this. So this is the subtotal text field. And we're going to do that by adding a new UI text field. And again, we're going to position this by hand. Again, it's a bit fiddly. So this is going to be 40 down the screen. Yeah, so we're just putting it underneath the other UI label, and it's going to be 300 wide. Oops, 330. Cut that wrong. And it's going to be full to tall. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just add that subtotal text field to the screen. So let's just do it. And we'll work out how that's bound in a moment. And then what we'd like to do is repeat that with a slider. So what we're going to do is for our label, let me just add this by cut and paste. So it's slightly easier to do it. So we're going to create a second label, label 2. And label 2 says generosity. And again, we need to tweak the positioning. So this one is going to be 80 down the screen. Yeah, and that's positioned. And then what we need to do is get a slider. So a slider in iOS, in UIKit, is a UI slider. And again, we need to position it. So we're going to put a new rectangle F, and it's going to be this time 10 into the screen, 120 down the page, 300 width. And let's just give this a height of 40 again. We'll just make everything consistent. Obviously, when you're doing this for real, you'll want to use the designer on iOS, and you'll probably want to use the designer, a real person, to do it as well. So we're going to add the slider. So it's not taking too long to build this up, but what we've now got is we've got a couple more things we'd like to put in. I'm just going to cut and paste these for convenience. So we've got a third label. Third label. And this third label starts down the screen at 160. And this third label says, so this is the calculated tip. And so we add the third label. And then we've got a couple more labels we'd like to add. So let me just do this. So we've actually got the one we're going to bind. So this is the tip label. Let's do that. We don't need that because we're going to let MvvmCross and the data binding work out how to bind these things. And then the final thing at the bottom is going to be the total. So we're just going through again, label 4, label 4. This is going to be total. And this is the total label. I'll have to sort out some of these sizings in a moment, but I'll do that. So we've got all these labels. Let's just see. So we go from 120 to 160. So the next one's going to be at 200. And then we're going to have one at 240. And then this final one is going to be at 280. So the only thing we haven't done now, we've got all of these text blocks, labels, etc. on the screen. We've got a slider and a text field. The only thing we haven't done is to actually do any data binding. So let's just add that. And so the easy way to create this data binding is for us to create a data binding set. So what we do is we call var set equals this, because it is an extension method, so that's why this is really important. And we call gris.createBinding set. And what it is it's a binding set from the view to the view model. So what we do is the view in this case is called first view, and the view model in this case is called first view model. So we do that, and we bring in using resharper, and then we bring in using resharper. So that's brought in those two namespaces. The two it's just brought in, particularly is the core one, and then this one here for the binding context. That's just resolving them. It's nothing too complicated. And then what we do is we actually want to add the binding. So what we do is we call set.bind, and the first thing we'd like to bind is our first our subtotal text field. So we're going to bind subtotal text field, and we're going to bind that to, on the view model, the view model property, which is subtotal. Yeah. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bind the progress, the slider. Let's see what we've got. We've got the slider to the view model, and that's going to be the tip. And then what we'd like to do is we'd like to bind the tip label to the view model, and this is to the tip label is bound to the tip. So actually I've got this wrong. The slider should be bound to the generosity. Sorry about that. And then what we'd like to bind is the total label to, and again this is just normal syntax, bm dot total. And finally, what we'd like to do is take that whole set and to apply it, and that's it. And so that's our data binding here. One thing that we should probably do is on the slider, there's probably some setup to do. So let's just take a look at the slider. And what we'd like to do is set the max value, the min value will start with 0. And what we'd like to do is the max value we'd like to set to 100. So that's set up our UI, and what we should be able to do, but it does depend whether my Mac's alive. So I've set up TeamViewer again, just as I did yesterday, and this time we're already connected, so it's a bit faster. And hopefully what we should be able to do is take hold of this, and we have to set it as a startup project. Now, as you were watching yesterday, you saw that there was one other step I have to do for any new project, and that's to go to IoC application, and I have to give it a name, TipCalc. And I have to give it an identifier, and I'll give it com.serious.tipcalc, and I have to give it a version. If I don't do those steps, it just won't run, and it'll give me a very obscure message about why I won't run, but at least it's done straightforward. So let's do that, and now let's run it up. Debug, start new instance. Now what's it telling me? Device not found. Okay, so what I've got to do also, dismiss this, is I've set this as a startup project, but what I also have to do at the top here is I have to remove the mixed platforms. I actually have to say what I'd like to run these. Is I would like to run the iPhone simulator, and then hopefully it will say I'd like to run the iPhone 0.1, but I'm actually going to choose the Retina because that's what I'm running. And let's just see if that now runs. Okay, so it claims to be running, so if I go over to TeamViewer, then is it going to run up for me? It claims to be running. Right, so it's running up the emulator, as you can see. And what you can hopefully see is we've got the subtotal with 100, got the tip at 20 there. If I move the slider, you can see again we've got real numbers coming in, we've got decimals. If I change this guy, hopefully you can see that we've got this. So we do actually also hit a problem here. There's no way of dismissing this keyboard, which is a bit of a shame. So what I should probably do is add some kind of gesture that removes that keyboard. But for now, hopefully you can see that it's there. So if I wanted to, add a gesture, let me just do that. So we're going to stop running this. And what we're going to do is we're going to just go back to first view. And there are various ways you can do this, but one way that I do it is to add a new gesture. So I think this is gesture equals new UI tap gesture recognizer. So when there's a tap, what I'd like to do is I'd like to get rid of the keyboard. And I do that by, so the only thing that's got the keyboard is the text field, which was called subtotal text field. And so I ask it to resign first responder. And what I do is I add that gesture recognizer. So it's just saying if somebody taps, please do this action. And I'm going to add that to my main view. Using that. So hopefully you can see that. It's not doing anything more complicated than just saying when there's a tap, please hide the keyboard. But it is using iOS words to do that. So if we run it up again, and hopefully we'll see across here, TipCalc will run up slowly. Is it running? Yeah, so it's running up. And hopefully you will see now that if I tap on here and I enter 1000, obviously I could also change things. And if I tap back, then the keyboard now hides. So that's a really quick overview. And again, it's just a walkthrough. The big differences from yesterday's walkthrough are that we've now started using calculation services, and we've allowed those to come in automatically using this magic block of IoC. And we've again shown today sharing XAML between Windows Phone and Windows Store. But we've shown the use of the designer in Droid. We haven't shown the use of the designer in Touch. We'll come to that hopefully very soon. But again, hopefully you've seen how to, from start to end, how to create an application inside sort of half an hour. If that's how long I've been talking, I don't know. And I hope that gives you a good second day of N+1 days of MvvmCross. Tomorrow I think I'll try and do some lifts, if I can say that. So it'll be table views in iOS, and it'll be bound list views in Android, and it'll be list views in Windows Store, and list boxes in Android. So thank you very much for listening. Hope it's been useful. If you've got feedback, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep plowing through lots of tutorials. If there's anything you particularly want covered, let me know. And I hope that's useful. Okay, I will stop recording. Thanks a lot. Bye.